Hey there, YouTube. I'm Ikitsu. This is the Ikitsu Times. Welcome to my channel. Welcome to a little bit of Sins of Solar Empire 2. So today we're talking about the Halcyon carrier, which is the only actual carrier capital ship. All the other ones are trying to do a couple other things there. The Sova is trying to also be a production line, and the Scarantra is a repair ship. So this is the only one that really is just a carrier. It's kind of like a miniature Anarchal Wanderer in that sort of sense there. So let's take a look at this thing here.
Your presence is strong.
So for stats, we're looking at 500 durability. We're looking at 4,500 shield points, 695 armor, 4,850 hull points, and 270 antimatter. It's got a hidden statistic of 55 armor strength and 650 maximum speed. Like all carriers, it's a little bit fragile and it's a little bit slow, which makes it quite vulnerable. But the carriers are generally sort of like that because you kind of can keep them to the back of a fight if you want to. For armaments, we're looking at 3 Crafts of Strike squadrons, and that's pretty good there. It's the strongest out of all of them at the start. We got 4 medium beams at 9 damage per second with 450 pierce for a total of 36 damage per second. That's 24 against capitals if we account for the pierce there. 8 PD lasers at 2.5 damage per second for a total of 20 damage per second with 0 pierce from them. Don't overestimate the point defense capabilities of the ship. It's a mistake I see some people sort of making. The 8-point defense guns here are quite decent, but they're not enough to keep up with a larger number of missiles. Remember, that's about the same as 2 and a bit-ish Garda flak frigates, and you wouldn't say that 2 and a bit Garda flak frigates are capable of really defending you against missiles all that effectively. That's basically what you're getting out of the Halcyon. It struggles even against just a couple of Javelises. If you are ever expanding into this place, it's got like a couple of those. The Halcyon struggles at point defensing against even just 2 of them. So anyhow, the damage from these sort of carriers is typically not really from the weapons. It's from the strike craft squadrons, and the fighters and bombers for this are very, very good. You've got a lot of them. They're capable of doing a lot of damage, so I wouldn't worry too much about the fact that your guns are a little bit on the weak end. That's fine. You're going to get more of them, and you're going to get a lot of strike craft with the Halcyon. So for abilities here, we're looking at the Telekinetic Push as our first one. This has a cooldown of 30 seconds, an antimatter cost of 90, and a duration of 15 seconds. These all stay the same. This does a wide radius of damage around it in a bit of a pulse. It's not very much damage, but it's intended to destroy things like the bombs, missiles, strike craft. It does seem to work against other ships. Its push also does work against corvettes, but its damage really only matters against the smallest things in the game, that being the bombs and missiles and torpedoes and stuff like that. You deal 10 damage per level here, so 10, 20, and 30 as you scale up there. And you also do an additional amount based on your psi power, which is, I believe, just a constant 10% of your psi power gets added to the damage there. You also reduce the speed and turn speed of, I believe it's just strike craft and bombers and missiles and stuff like that. I haven't seen it impact the turn speed or move speed of larger ships as far as I've been able to tell. But it has a minus 30%, minus 60%, minus 90% on those. Or actually, I think it's 30, 45, and 60 is how that one scales up. And then also, again, you're getting a percentage based off of your psi power. This time being, what the heck is it? 30% of your psi power, I believe, goes into your reduction on turn speed and speed. So this makes it so that you can compress missile waves that are heading towards you because they start moving way slower once they enter the zone. And it's a somewhat wide zone here. It's not huge, but it's big enough that you can get a decent number of missiles in it. The telekinetic push can sort of cause enemy missiles if you have enough Halcyons to sort of like bunch up a little bit, so that a second one can also use telekinetic push and then blow up a larger number of missiles from that telekinetic push there. And then like a whole bunch sort of come in there. They sort of bunch up because they hit the telekinetic push barrier. And then you use a third one to actually blow them up. You actually need quite a few Halcyons to really point defense effectively with telekinetic push. And it has to be fairly high level. The 10 damage doesn't seem to be enough to destroy any of the missiles that are from dedicated missile attack ships, and it's certainly not enough to deal with armored heavy missiles from tech. That it basically is completely ineffective against those specific missiles there. It also does decent damage against strike craft, but you have to do multiple telekinetic pushes. I would view this as sort of a secondary bonus against those. You're going to want to have your point defense guns and your fighters actually doing the killing. This just softens them up so that you can get rid of them a lot faster. Still, all in all, it's a very sort of like cheap version of the Anarchal Wanderer's pulse ability, or you could think of the pulse ability as like the very strong version of telekinetic push. Works well against strike craft, works well against missiles, but it's not really amazing against either of those sort of things there. I prefer taking, honestly, the Vigilus over really focusing on using telekinetic push micro. I think the Vigilus is actually a really strong ship, and I think it's just underrated. It can completely replace telekinetic push even when you're taking a large number of Halcyons. The next ability here is Adept Drone Anima. This one just gives you maximum squadrons, so +1, +2, +3, and that's what makes this ship have the most potential carrier capacity in the game. It gives you 11 strike craft squadrons, so if you were to compare two of these to the Anarchal, this thing is actually carrying more fighters than the Anarchal is at maximum level for both of them. Without too much issue there. Makes it very, very good and efficient as a carrier, and you can actually use it as a replacement for the Aria drone host in terms of carrier capacity. However, you do have to have a fairly high level before they're actually ahead of the Aria drone host supply-wise. So the next ability here is Anima Tempest. So this is a targeted ability. You target an enemy ship there, whatever it is you decide to hit. It has an extremely large range. Cooldown is 60 seconds, range of 20,000, antimatter cost is 90. And what happens when you cast this is that target gets designated by the Halcyon, and all of the strike craft that belong to that Halcyon will gain a damage bonus against that target and will immediately turn to focus fire that target. So if you've got a bunch of bombers or what have you, and you're targeting a capital ship, Anima Tempest is going to make it so that not only are your bombers immediately going to go attack your target for that, but they're also going to do increased damage. It's for a duration of 30 seconds, you're getting plus 15% damage, plus 10% of your psi power as a percentage. So at level 2, it's 30%. At level 3, it's 45%. So when you got 45% extra damage, and you're getting that with a bunch of psi power, again, we're going to assume that we can get a pretty easy 300 for a caster type ship, and this shouldn't be in direct combat. You're looking at an easy 75% bonus to your weapon damage. If you got 200, you're looking at 65, which is still pretty big bonus there. So Anima Tempest is really, really strong for just boosting the damage that your bombers are dealing against that whatever target is that you're fighting against. And having multiple Halcyons that are like with large numbers of strike squadrons, all with all bombers focusing one target down, they can kill that thing really, really quickly with Anima Tempest. I do think that the Halcyon, because of this, is your designated bomber carrier, and your Aria drone hosts should be the ones that are carrying a larger number of fighters, because Anima Tempest doesn't really help your strike craft fighters very much. They only really help your bombers, in all honesty. If you have a bunch of fighters, they will still be able to benefit from Anima Tempest, but if you're shooting at a lighter target and you're using this ability, they're going to evaporate that target way before the 30 seconds is up, and it doesn't spill over to a new target or anything like that, so you just wiped out one target and it cost you 90 antimatter. And a long cooldown. So it's better in those cases to just use the fighters as they are from a larger number of other ships and not focus on using Anima Tempest on them. Still, it's a pretty good damage boost, damage steroid, and it does actually push the Halcyon into actually being a really deadly ship in terms of the damage output of its abilities against an enemy ship there with the bomber strike craft. Altogether, just very, very good at shredding enemy capitals or cruisers. For our last ability, we've got Shield Blessing. This is what makes Advent so good with carriers. This did get heavily nerfed, but it has a cooldown of 6 minutes. It has an antimatter cost of 200, and it gives your strike craft a shield point pool of 50 plus a fifth of your psi power. And it kind of sucks that it's down to that now. It used to be 100 plus half your psi power for a duration of 90 seconds. You can still get this pretty high, and you can still make this pretty good. Getting an extra 100 hit points or even 120 hit points onto your strike craft is a really strong thing there. And sort of like having your carrier being able to apply that to all of your strike craft across your entire fleet is what makes this so powerful, because it's not just this one Halcyon's strike craft that are given the shield blessing. It's actually all of your fighters and all of your bombers in the gravity well, making it so that if you've got a couple of Halcyons that have shield blessing available and you've got a whole bunch of Aria drone hosts, this makes the Aria drone host stronger as well. So this is really, really good. The amount of extra hit points that are granted to you is really strong there. It makes it so that enemies just take so much longer to chew through your strike craft that, generally speaking, it's just not worth trying to by going fighter to fighter. You're just going to win every sort of fighter engagement in that sort of sense there. You do actually need quite a few Halcyons to really get the most out of Shield Blessing, but it's totally worth it if you can. If you're going for an all-carrier type build, this is the only thing that really makes that viable as Advent. Otherwise, your ships are just a little bit too vulnerable to getting eroded down quickly. But if you've got a bunch of ships that have Shield Blessing, you're going to dominate the skies. The enemy's going to have 0 fighters. You're going to have total control of the skies. You'll have blown up a bunch of their point defense ships before they can even respond. Once that happens, you get to a sort of steady state where it doesn't even matter if you lose Shield Blessings. They don't have anything that can blow up your strike craft anymore, and you just win. Very, very powerful effect. It's very meta-defining for the Advent. If you're going for carriers, this is what makes them capable of like sticking to that into the late game there. So for hostility research, this is an interesting ship as far as all this goes. Ideally speaking, I actually think that you want to keep the Halcyon itself relatively to the back. Early game when you don't have like other capitals and you don't have like the rest of your fleet. You could definitely say that you want the shield bonuses and the shield burst bonuses and stuff like that. But generally speaking, the way I see Advent carriers is that you just go all in on carriers. So you just get your starting Halcyon, you get more Halcyons, and you just get more Aria drone hosts. And you just play ring around the rosy against your opponent there where you're dodging away from them. In which case you don't really need the shields. If you are using these guys as a sort of support tool for a larger fleet, though, you do need like shield bonuses, but I would think of them as being important for the... At that point in time, the Halcyon and your other carriers become a support element to your fleet, and you would prioritize your upgrades based on other ships, not your Halcyon itself. However, this ship does go through antimatter pretty quickly, especially if you're going for telekinetic push. If you are going for that, you absolutely have to have a lot of antimatter regeneration so that you can use those abilities when you need them. But if you're just going for the Anima Tempest, you don't need it as badly. This is relatively efficient casting, so at that point you could prioritize other things if you'd like to. Lasers are very, very good for this. Early game, especially when you get the multispectral lasers still, you're aiming mostly at lighter targets with your fighters, and you're going to switch over to anti-heavy duty later when you switch over to bombers. So early game, you want these laser bonuses. They're really, really powerful. Your fighters are extremely strong during the early game. They can wipe out frigates and corvettes extremely effectively. But then you can also switch over to the beams. That gives you great damage with your bombers and so on and so forth. This also gives you great damage on the Halcyon itself because it has very good damage with its beams. Pretty good damage with its beams, actually. Diffusion moderation is quite good for the Halcyon. Unlike the Aria drone host, where we're only considering the effect this has on the strike craft, the Halcyon itself, if it gets really good range by getting the diffusion moderation and the hastened acceleration, can end up being really, really far to the back. You can end up ridiculously backline with it, in which case you're firing off shots from like such a long distance, from such a safe distance that you probably aren't taking damage. That's kind of what you want from this thing, and that also helps with the point defense, having a wider net with that point defense system. So hasten acceleration, diffusion moderation can keep your Halcyon safer while still letting it contribute a little bit with that damage from its main guns there, but ideally speaking you want it to be in the back using its strike craft for majority of what you're doing there. Plasma, not really that important. It's just planetary bombardment stuff there. For this one, unlike with other capitals for Advent, you really, really care about the hull point bonuses. The hull point bonuses are going to make your strike craft stronger, and that makes them more resilient, so you don't have to replace many of them. This is the only time that it's more important than shields, because your fighters don't have natural shields. You don't care about armor like at all with this ship. It has no armor to begin with, and your fighters also don't have any armor, so it's not really that important for you. You're going to mostly want to care about the hull points bonuses out of everything. The Halcyon itself also has very good hull points with relatively low armor, so that does also help the survivability of the Halcyon itself quite a bit more. If you are going to be using this as a sort of like backline support unit, though, obviously these become more important because your front line has to be able to hold up a little bit better there. So for Harmony research, we got access to the protection of the Unity. The Halcyon doesn't actually really care about this all that much. It's not really that important for it because the Halcyon itself should be in the back and not getting shot at. If you have got your Strikecraft out there, they also don't benefit from this at all. The Advent Wrath, their 30 extra psi power does actually matter for this. It makes a lot of their abilities a little bit better, making it so they can do a little bit more damage with the Anima Tempest, and you can also get better telekinetic pushes, and you can also get better shielding. It's just all quite good there. For the late game, the extra 20% damage from Fury of the Unity is, of course, really strong for everything. Now, for Unity here, we don't actually care about really much of any of this. The only one that I think really is important for the Halcyon is actually recall. And the reason is that carriers and the carrier capitals are quite slow. So being able to use recall to get a Halcyon fleet out of danger is primarily what I would say this is for, especially because like the Halcyon is fairly fragile, it's fairly slow, and it has like no innate like escape abilities. If you end up in a situation where you're trying to like kite around your opponent's fleet around a gravity well for a really long time, you get yourself cornered, you made a mistake in your movement. You can use recall to get your entire fleet out of there. Or, you've just done enough damage to your opponent and you want to get out of there just real quick without having to think about it too hard. You can use recall to get your fleet out of there and make it so that you've done a whole ton of damage to your opponent. You've taken no damage yourself. Just as they're about to be able to start trading against you, you get out of there before they can even land a hit against you. I think that would also have a really big psychological impact on your opponent. Now, if you do screw up, the Resurrection can be good here, but I basically don't think that any of those sort of things are that important for the Halcyon in particular. Advent Wrath is kind of similar. Chastise is a major exception, though. Chastise can make it so that a full Halcyon and Aria drone host fleet that is kiting around a gravity well can become literally just unstoppable. You just sort of end up in a situation where your opponent is trying to run around in circles, trying to keep up with you. You're running around in circles, trying to keep away from them. You're popping Chastise every once in a while. Their ships fall way behind. You've got like the entire gravity well at your mercy there. You can basically make it so your opponent can never touch you if you're playing as Advent Wrath going carriers. Fury can be okay if you've got a bunch of lighter point defense ships, like you're just fighting into a whole bunch of Guard of Flak frigates. Or the Drunsark Wardens. At that point in time, that can sort of help clear those out a little bit, but I don't think that it synergizes super well with any of the abilities on the Halcyon itself. And of course, it doesn't help if you're in a mirror match and you're against the Vigilus. The other one is Avatar, and I also don't think that really helps out with the Halcyon in particular. The reason is that your Strikecraft tend to get away from you a little bit. They tend to not be in the radius of Avatar, so they're not really getting any of that bonus anyway. So you can't really boost the damage that the Halcyon is doing as easily or as effectively with an Avatar as you could with anyone else. So I think that this is a ship that just doesn't really use the Unity effects very well, or plays that nicely with them, with the one exception of Chastise being absolutely just broken when you're using it with Halcyons. So for builds, there's actually a few. If we're using this thing as a dedicated sort of point defense system, we are using this as our point defender. If we want to use telekinetic push, we do really need to find like the Halcyon resurgence or whatever, so we can get like the reduced cooldown on our telekinetic push so that we can cast a little bit faster. If we're getting that, we can make it so that this is capable of doing like better and more consistent pushes. It means that we don't need quite as many Halcyons, but barring having that, we do still need to have like harmony circuits for that extra psi power so that we can actually do more damage with it. We can also go for the Psionic Dynamo if we want to, but what I actually think is really interesting about going this route is you can get the Energy Accelerator, the Vex Amplifier, and then, say, the Synchronous Shields on this combination, and what'll happen is you're going to have a really boosted telekinetic push from your Harmony Circuit and from whatever else you can get there. But your actual point defense guns suddenly become really scary from the Vex Amplifier Energy Accelerator. So even though you've only got like the 8 point defense lasers, it's acting more like you've got 24 of them. At that point in time, you're still not like efficient compared to the Vigilus, but combine that with the telekinetic push and you kind of are, especially if you're building multiples of these as anti-missile tech. I don't necessarily think this is the best way to go about this, and I don't think that telekinetic push is necessarily the strongest ability putting on the Halcyon. But if we're sort of maxing telekinetic push, that is actually sort of how I would go about that. If you're going for this route, you're so good at chopping down enemy fighter craft that it's kind of scary. So I think that that's a viable way to do it. If I'm going telekinetic push primary and I'm going for a secondary ability, it's going to be adept drone anima. And I'm going to be getting like fighters and stuff like that. We're really focused on getting that sort of anti-strike, anti-missile sort of tech going down. So fighters are better than bombers in that case. And we're not going to bother taking Anima Tempest. We can't afford to cast it. And it has negative synergy with what we're trying to accomplish here, which is destroy enemy strike craft, presumably. Of course, we're then going to get like Shield Blessing, but a level 3 telekinetic push. With all those bonuses, with that psi power, we can actually start getting rid of fairly heavy missiles there. And with the gun complement that we got, we can actually do some pretty interesting damage to enemy missiles there. The one problem is this is quite fragile and a little bit out there, but you would use this in a situation where you can sort of tell that your opponent's investing very deeply into things that can be countered by a Halcyon's point defense capabilities. Personally, I don't like this build. I think that's better to just go for Vigiluses, but it is definitely there and it is definitely interesting. You can even be a little bit further back because the point defenses with the Energy Accelerator have got, I think, like 9,000 range, maybe more than that with Diffusion Moderation. It can get pretty nutty how far away you can actually be while still destroying missiles with that type of build there. The one that I actually think is the easiest to use is you max out Adept Drone Anima, and then you take secondary Anima Tempest. You could also take a little bit of telekinetic push there, but maxing out Adept Drone Anima during the early game is really, really powerful. During the later parts of the game, when you've actually got a whole bunch of strike craft, Anima Tempest becomes stronger. But during the super early game, just having another 32 damage per second from another fighter squadron when you're only looking at 3 squadrons otherwise, that's a really big bonus to your damage. That's bigger than the amount that you're getting from Anima Tempest by a lot, because this isn't even up 100% of the time. This is up like 50% of the time. So you can effectively half the damage from this. So just getting an extra squadron is really, really powerful. But one of the things that you can do is you can go for Adept Drone Anima, you can go for Anima Tempest, you can go for Adept Drone Anima, but then you take the next 2 levels in Anima Tempest, because at that point in time you kind of want to sort of transfer over to bombers. And then switch to Anima Tempest as your primary way of dealing damage, because by then you'll have 7 squadrons. At that point in time, having 1 extra is not going to be that big of a deal. You're increasing from 7 to 8 instead of like getting the extra damage out of Anima Tempest. I'd rather get the extra damage out of Anima Tempest at that point in time. So I think that that's one way to do this, but if you're still just going Adept Drone Anima, the way that you're doing this is you're just a carrier, you're keeping to the back there, you're not even as worried about your psi power, so you don't have to worry about this stuff, you just keep to the back. You maybe have like an energy accelerator so you can contribute some firepower from the back, some point defense from the back, but you're a dedicated carrier, you don't worry about this thing, you just keep it in the back and leave it out of the fight there. The last one, of course, is you're going for Anima Tempest. You're playing it a little bit more for this purpose there. It's very similar to that previous one. In that case, the Cyanide Dynamo could be a little bit better because you want that psi power scaling a little bit more so. But again, you're keeping it relatively to the back here. The thing about the Halcyon is that, like, if you're going for the defense stuff, this is because your opponent's like diving past all of your other units and really trying to go after the Halcyons, but they're not actually that kind of unit. They're not the sort of unit that you dive through an army to try and kill. Their ability to deal damage like over time is really, really strong. Their ability to sort of do some point defense stuff, get rid of strike craft, that's also all quite strong. But they're a little bit like the Anarchal Wanderer. If you don't care about the like telekinetic push, you don't care about the strong point defense abilities, then basically they're dealing a lot of damage, but they're not doing anything game-breaking. They're not doing anything like what the Scarantra is capable of doing, where it's keeping their entire fleet alive. So it's kind of okay to keep the Halcyon alone. You want to actually focus on other ships that have a bigger impact, that are going to be annoying you even more so. Things like the Radiance, things like the Progenitor Mothership are usually higher impacts in terms of the overall flow of the battle than the Halcyon. So it's pretty safe usually to give these guys relatively low defenses and focus on just giving them a lot of range, keeping them really far to the back. However, if your opponent really does go after them, you're playing these as carriers that are running away constantly. You're not really using them in a fight. In that case, you want to just go for sheer defense. What you can actually do is kind of get caught out with the Halcyons while your Aria drone hosts get further away from the enemy and make it out of the fight, because they're a lot more fragile than the Aria is. If the Aria's got a bunch of defense upgrades, it's got like a Harmony Circuit and then say the Structural Force Field, Synchronous Shield, and maybe even Psychonite Plating, but probably Consecration Inducer. Or you could even just go like Synchronous Shield, Structural Force Fields, Harmony Circuit, and the Psionic Dynamo, and then you focus on Telekinetic Push as your last defensive option. You just fly these guys around in a circle, you let them get caught, your enemy thinks that they're making some good progress there, then you just pop away with Recall or something like that. This is a great way to sort of use these guys in a way where they're hard to kill, so you're not losing anything, your opponent's losing a bunch of stuff, and you're just sort of wearing them down while slowly building up your forces, getting to the point where you can completely overwhelm them with carriers. Even if they do build point defense, you'll be so far ahead in terms of numbers that they just can't do anything about it. That's kind of how you go about that. But the defensive tools make that a little bit easier in case you do get caught in a way that you're hoping you don't. So yeah, that's pretty much the only way to build this thing. It's not a ton of different builds for this. If you are going for a like frontline point defense one, you could also go for something like the Vex Amplifier, Energy Accelerator, and then you could actually go for a couple defensive options. Like you could go Synchronous Shield and Structural Force Fields. That would keep this thing alive for a lot longer, be a lot better for that. But it's kind of difficult to say that that's relevant. The only time, again, that you're doing this is like your opponent has got a bunch of missiles, in which case you shouldn't need the Synchronous Shield and the Structural Force Fields. You could just get away with the Synchronous Shields by itself. If your opponent is not using point defenses or stuff that can be killed by point defenses, like they're just using Kalos or something like that, then they probably don't care about your point defense Halcyon. They're probably not going to focus it down because it's just not that relevant to the fight there. And you probably don't need to push it forward. If you're going the Energy Accelerator, Vex Amplifier, and you're up against missiles, you actually kind of have to push yourself a little bit forward so that you can actually point defense properly. But if you're hanging out in the back line because you don't have anything to point defense down, your opponent doesn't have any missiles, then you can just use the Energy Accelerator to keep the Halcyon out of the fight and have it sort of fight from long range until it is needed against some missile launchers or something like that. So, that's how I would say you should protect this, generally speaking. In any event, though, that's going to be everything about the Halcyon. I hope you found this one enjoyable, and of course, as always, hope to see you guys all next time.